This episode is in partnership with Authority Magazine. Authority Magazine, a Medium publication, is devoted to sharing in-depth and interesting interviews featuring people who are authorities in business, pop culture, wellness, social impact, and tech.
We've all heard the phrase, treat others as you would have them treat you.
Well, today's guest has turned that into a lifestyle and a mission.
With his organization, veahavta, Avrum Rosensweig has worked with those in poverty around the world. Avrum, welcome to Believe in People.
Thank you. Lovely to be here. Appreciate it.
Well, you've done an awful lot in your life. We're going to get into it. I don't know. We'll cover as much as we possibly can, but I think it's going to be really tough to do that. Avrum, how has your upbringing shaped your mission of repairing the world, which is a big thing?
Right. So I was born into a rabbinical home. My father was a rabbi in Kitchener, Ontario, Canada, for about 36, 37 years. He died in 1989 at a young man, 61 years old. So I'm older than him now, and that's weird.
Yeah, I bet.
Right. Anyways, my father was old school in many ways, but he was also a very, very big activist and a very courageous man and very brave. And he would be one of those individuals standing out in the forefront during the Soviet Jewry rallies and other such things. We had people who my father would bring home, and they would live with us for a day, for a week, sometimes for a year, and sometimes for 2 years. So activism was a huge part of my DNA and my growing up years. And we were constantly surrounded by it. And of course, my mother, as part of that team, was an individual who was just all about giving and helping others as a Rebbitzin, the wife of a rabbi. That's sort of the genesis of it.
Huh.
Yes.
Has religion changed since you were a kid?
My religious understanding or pursuit, or religion in general?
The latter.
Well, I think yes, I think it's become more extreme. That you'll find within the Jewish community, which I know very well, that sort of the right wing side of it has become more pronounced. And not only has there been a more strict adherence to religion and the laws, but they have become far more complex. There's a lot of laws that have been added to it. Now, that being said, at the core of Judaism is the idea of learning Torah. And from that, we develop our intellect. And from there, the Jewish people, I think, have shown a lot of success through creativity. So there's a lot more Torah learning than ever. And I would say a lot of healthy Torah learning. I went to yeshiva when I was younger, which is a Talmud school specifically for boys. And it was not quite as, I would say, creative and well-rounded in terms of its education as you can find today. So there's a bit of this and there's a bit of that.
Yeah, I bet. And so is that what shaped what was to be? You launched Canada's first Jewish humanitarian organization, which is in itself really something. But tell us a little bit about that and how that came to be for you, Avrum.
Yeah, so I became very conscious of the world's response to the needs of the homeless and those who are suffering, not only here in Canada or in the States, but around the world. That was something that was drilled into me through my learning, through my home life. I came to Toronto from Kitchener when I was 13 years old. I went to, as I said, yeshiva for 6 years, 5 years in Toronto and 1 year in Jerusalem. And then when I was finished all that, ultimately I ended up in the employ of the United Jewish Appeal, which is sort of the central federation of the Jewish world. So if you go to any metropolitan cities where there's a large Jewish community, you will see a federation there. And they're responsible for building the Jewish community, for fundraising, allotting those funds, and doing some work around the world as well. What I realized in 1994, when I was working at the United Jewish Appeal and the genocide in Rwanda began, and the war in the Balkans, which is a terrible, terrible war, was launched, that my community was pretty much as quiet as most other communities. And that was hard for me because we were also brought up on the concept of never again. Depending on how you define it, the way I define it was that if we see an injustice in the world, that we will respond to it. And of course, we all know what happened in Rwanda in 100 days. Up to 1 million people were murdered, many of them machete to death. And our response was very muted. It bothered me a lot. So I started thinking, and I was really, really curious as to how I might be able to fix this, through the concept of what we call tikkun olam, which is repairing the world. And it took me about 2 years to figure out the mission statement for veahavta, which is the organization I launched. And thank God it's still up and running today and very vibrant and very strong. And ultimately, I came up with a mission statement that we, the Jewish people, will use our talents and skills and resources to respond to the needs of the world. It was pretty vague, pretty general. And we launched in 1997.
Well,
Someone who worked in both Rwanda and Bosnia, I do need to ask you to bring it up to today's standard because not only is there a war raging in Ukraine, we have a situation in Palestine that has, by many, been compared to the never again that you referred to in your previous answer. I asked the first question was, has religion, church, synagogue, whatever changed? I do find that there is a lot of politics in our religion. How can you maintain what it is that you're trying to do when there is so much politics in our
Right.
religion today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not highly political. Although I don't think that it's very easy to be apolitical or stand on the side of politics today, especially with the new administration in Washington. It's almost impossible not to respond to it because the effects are everywhere, not only in the United States and Canada and around the world. And in my mind, many of the effects are not very good at all. But when you're a humanitarian, it's really your job to embrace both sides of the aisle, if you will. Democrats, the Republicans, the liberals, the conservatives in Canada, and to do your very best to explain to them that when we worked in Guyana, South America, and what we would do is we would send medical teams, both Jewish and non-Jewish, combined with hundreds of thousands of dollars of pharmaceuticals to the rainforests of this country, which up until a few years ago was the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere after Haiti. We also worked in rural Zimbabwe at the Howard Hospital, which was a Salvation Army hospital, working with the chief of staff there, if you will, Dr. Paul Thistle, and helping in the area of HIV/AIDS and other such things. Politics would come up. And people would often say within my community outside, but well, how can you work in these particular areas? How can you work with the Catholics or the Salvationists? They don't allow, condoms and so on and so forth. And everything would become very, very politicized. And, religion, you'd see the very unsavory side of religion as well. And what our job really was to remind people, listen, at the end of the day, when God created the world, however you describe that, he didn't create Republicans or Democrats. He created people. He created guys, he created girls, and they had feelings and they had thoughts. And when they saw someone suffering, outside of the Garden of Eden, their response would be, let's get over there and bandage this problem. Let's be part of it. It's not easy. It's not easy. I had a guy I remember who came to me and he said, if you make your organization more right wing or whatever that means and more religious, I will
get more
give
money.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a nice chunk of change on the table. I
Sure.
said, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I just can't do it. It doesn't make sense to who we are and who we're supposed to be. Humanitarian by definition is mostly apolitical. I mean, there's politics in everything, right? Sure, there's
Mm.
politics on this show, right?
Mm.
But we have to stand outside of it, and that in itself is an art form.
Yeah, absolutely. And Amara, speaking of art form, then, and I mean, across your humanitarian work and also the radio work that you do that we want to tap into, how do you keep your own spirituality or your sense of purpose? How do you stay grounded when there's so many things that could be really overwhelming?
Yeah, so I guess I come into this moment. I'm 64 years old with a lot of discussion in my history about religiosity, about God. When I'm not religious anymore. In other words, I don't keep Shabbat and I don't eat only kosher, but I learn constantly and I give classes in Torah. I do part of my podcast is a series which is called Parsha and Prose. And I do that together with a very erudite, very scholarly man, Rabbi Shlomo Gomorrah, brilliant, brilliant human being. And I love him very much. And we discuss the Torah portion of the week through the lens of classic literature. So, as an example, we recorded a show yesterday on Vayera, which is again the portion of the Torah of the week. There are 54 portions, and we did it through the lens of Leon Uris's Exodus. And of course, Exodus talks about freedom. You know the book. Exodus talks about freedom. It talks about the oppressed. It talks about finding the homeland. Very similar to the portion of the Torah that we learn from. So I'm surrounded by it. Most of my family, most of my friends are Orthodox Jews. I also have an 18-year-old son. God bless him. And when you're raising a boy, when you're raising a young man, and you come into that parenthood, fatherhood, with a sense of the world that we live in, I'm in constant state of awe of our existence constantly. My son is always reminding me about the beauty of life, the spirit of it. And I think that comes into play as well.
Hmm. So you're the Good Samaritan.
Yeah, I can be a bit of a dick too sometimes, though. Yeah.
The thing, the thing about yeah, clearly you're Canadian. The thing about the Good Samaritan thing is that nothing was ever asked in return. It just happened. Everybody else was walking by and looking the other way. We're really good at that in today's world, aren't we? Does it take courage to be like that?
Yeah, it takes courage and it takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
And it can really, really wear you down. When I left veahavta in really, I left full time. You tend to leave these things slowly. But when
Yeah.
I ultimately left around 2016, 17, when I really retired from it and I started doing other things, I was pretty burned out. I was pretty
Yeah, I
burned
bet.
out. And I was burned out, because administratively, I'm not very good. And I struggled with that. I don't know if you two guys have been involved in the administrative end of things. It sucks the life out of you, right? So that was really tough. And the courageous side of it is being able to wake up every morning and open your eyes and remind yourself as to what your task is. So, as an example, we worked in Haiti after the earthquake. One moment there were 250,000 people and the rest of the population walking the grounds of Haiti. And in the next moment, and literally that earthquake took moments, 250,000 people were gobbled up by the earth. We worked with the Israelis to send a medical tent there and to set it up and to do tertiary care. And very, very important work and very good work. In fact, the Israelis were the first ones who landed in Haiti. They actually I believe they built their own runway. And you think to yourself, my God, like this is very biblical in nature. Imagine the level of suffering. We work here with the homeless and the impoverished. So we have vans that go out into the streets every night of the week together with volunteers. It's bloody cold here, and I know it is in Chicago and Hamilton as well. I texted my son the other night. I said, "Sweetheart, good night." He lives most of the time with his mom in Toronto, and I said, "Remember, as warm as we are, that there are many people tonight who are sleeping out on a park bench. We have to remind ourselves of that, and we have to do our very best to try to make their lives better." The courage comes in the ability to remain conscious and aware and to keep your eyes open and to remind yourself how blessed we are to have what we have, to be inside. I just turned on the heat before this interview, and I am cozy and I am warm, and you can see my books behind me. I have the warmth enough so to be able to actualize my gifts and my talents. That can be really tough to remind yourself of that. And
Yeah,
at the
for
end of
sure.
the day, I'm sure you guys are somewhat existential in nature. You're doing a podcast, you're curious about humankind. You think to yourself, like, why me? Why do I have this and they don't? And how do I stay awake through all of this? It's not easy.
No. And Avram, then what inspires you now with the work that you're doing?
So I'm really excited that I can do a podcast. We live in great times, really good times that way. The idea that I can get on the air and create a theme that I want to, and then articulate it and get it out to the public, man, that excites the hell out of me. I mean, my grandfather, Zaidi Moshe Chaim, my mother's father, was a chazan. He was a cantor. But you know what he did for 40 years? Most of the time, he worked in a slipper factory, right? And I was talking to Rabbi Gamora yesterday about this. Is like when someone leaves this earth and you think to yourself, that man, that woman was really like a really special person, but they never seem to have actualized themselves. You know, they had this wonderful gift inside of them of being able to make people happy, but they had to make slippers in order to pay for food on the table. It's not me. I don't have very much money. I'm awful with money, actually, but I get by, enough so. And I was able to create a panel discussion on how do children think. And I brought on friends of mine who
That's
work in
cool.
the public school system, and I brought on this young girl, beautiful girl. We all know these types who is aware, who is thoughtful, who is really articulate, and I was able to ask her, what is it like to be a kid? How do you think? How do adults think? I think that's a wonderful gift. I love this business, and I love the idea of being able to get what's on my mind out there into other people's minds. I love
Yeah.
that.
You say you suck with money,
Yeah.
but it sounds to me like you're far richer anyway.
Yeah.
Well, I am until the visa bill comes, I have to pay for my son's hockey, eh? You know,
Oh,
Uh,
right.
well, hockey, eh? Well, you're from Chicago. You're a hockey guy, right? Although your team
He
Totally.
is a
sucks.
hockey guy.
I am a hockey guy.
Yeah.
And
So
hockey is not cheap anymore.
not at
Not,
all. In order
you're
to
not
go
on
to
that. You're not on the pond anymore.
not on a pond. And by the way, Blackhawks suck. So I'm sorry, but
Avram, what have you learned from your son?
I'll tell you, man, this kid is really special. But of course, I think by virtue of evolution, I think we're trained to believe our kids are the most special in the world. It makes sense so we don't kill them.
Yeah.
Um, my son is a really thoughtful kid. Like he wonders about life. And he asks the most interesting questions. When he was little, I used to write down all the really compelling things that he used to say. We had an Aunt Sylvia, who died a number of years ago. She was about 93, and I remember bringing Noah, my son, to see her. And he was a little guy, and he had long hair down his back because his mother and I thought that would be very cool. Later on, he came to us. He said, "Daddy, I want to be like everybody else. So would you cut my hair off?" I said, "Sure." We're standing in front of Auntie Sylvia, who wasn't speaking at that time. She stopped speaking. Old folks, there comes a time, okay, like enough already, right? She stopped speaking, then she stopped eating, and then she died. So I'm standing there in front of Auntie Sylvia with Noah, and she's not saying a word. She's nodding her head. She's smiling. She was full of light, my aunt was. And my little guy turns to me, and he must have been 3 or 4 years old, and he says, "Daddy, why does Sylvia need a mouth?" Like,
Good question.
that's a great question, right? Nowadays, he's studying at University of Toronto, and he's taking economics, he's taking social studies, international relations, and he's really, really getting into it. So, of course, when we sit around the table, we're on the couch about to watch the Leafs games, existential questions will come up, questions about life or about economics. Daddy, what is your take on supply side economics? And I'm thinking, oh man, this kid's like he's 18, but he's really into his studies. So his mind inspires me. He's also a very kind person. He's really kind, and he'll let people through the door before him. He will thank people profusely for something that they have done for him. He will ask people per their welfare. Doesn't matter where we go, if it's the server at a restaurant or the clerk behind the counter at a dry cleaner, he'll say, "How are you today? It's very nice to see you." So I learned goodness from him, and I'm also learning intellect. I'm learning about the human spirit through my son.
Wow.
I'd be interested in knowing whether you think our world has become insular in enough ways that the kind of work that you're trying to do, the kind of work that your son's trying to do when he talks to the cashier behind the counter, these sorts of things are becoming a thing of the past.
No, I don't think so. I think that the world works cyclically. Cyclically, is that the word? Cyclically?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the fact that we have one government in the White House or here in Canada and Ottawa today versus another who will approach things much differently is inevitable. And it's going to keep on going. Why? Because there's a little bit of right wing inside of us. There's a little bit of left wing. There's a great Charlie Brown that I remember when I was growing up as a kid. And Charlie Brown said, well, to Lucy, he said, "I'm really feeling awful today. I'm feeling really bad." So Lucy says, "Well, you know, Charlie, why don't you tilt a little bit this way, and the bad, right, and the bad will flow into the good, and you'll feel much better." That's how I look at humankind. So does it get more difficult to raise funds at certain times? Yes, it does, for various reasons. You can easily be construed as a liberal in humanitarian work. Why are you helping the non-Jews? You know, some Jews might say, we have so many problems of our own. You should focus just on our people. That can happen. And sometimes that approach can be more focused than other times.
What's your response?
Well, my response is, listen, the Jewish people are made up of a pie like any other people. And part of that pie is the Haredi community, which is the ultra Orthodox. And part of that is the atheist Jew who loves the culture and who loves the holidays, but God does not play a part in it. And then there are a bunch of other pieces that are essentially other facets, denominations, etc., of the Jewish community. And we have to respect all of them. I embrace my Haredi brothers and sisters, the right wing, the very religious Jews who walk down the street on Shabbat with the long curls and the black hats. We all know them. You know, they're like, they look like Jewish Mennonites, but I embrace them because I know, I understand what their truth is, and I understand how they think because I went to those yeshivas, right? But by the same token, I know the Reform Jew, I know the humanitarian Jew. And it's our job to work together towards the betterment of the world, towards the betterment of the Jewish people, and towards the betterment of the self. So my response is, hey, you do your Haredi thing. That's good. Do that. I'm good with it. I'll even support it. But allow me and embrace me for doing my stuff in Guyana, in Zimbabwe, and in Haiti and other places around. Why? Because we need all of that. It's all important.
That's
It's all
true.
part of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Avram, what's your favorite? Just, I know we're coming to our end, but I want to know what's your favorite, who's the most favorite person you've interviewed so far on your show?
Me.
I'd have
On
to
his
say
show.
Oh, I'm sorry. He's on my
Kevin
show.
Tibbles.
His
You're
show.
on my
Kevin
show.
For sure, Kevin, man, no question about it.
Kevin
And you're very,
Tibbles.
Amy, you're a close second. I know it sounds funny. I've interviewed stars. I've interviewed Michael Bublé and Harry Belafonte. I just interviewed Bob Ray, who's Canada's ambassador to the United Nations.
Yep.
Michal Cutler, who is Israel's envoy fighting anti-Semitism, and some very high-profile people. But I'll tell you who I enjoy most. It sounds cheesy, but I'm telling you, it's from my heart. I go to a restaurant across the street from here. It's called Wimpy's. Do you have those very consistent, menus? Great burgers, great hot dogs. I just like the food there, and I always order the same thing. Anyways, there is a server there. Her name is Dodi, and Dodi is Ethiopians, and I have great place in my heart for Ethiopians. I dated an Ethiopian woman, Lemlem Techla, and she was with me during some very difficult times. And her spirit was so illuminated. Really, such an interesting people. So I interviewed Dodi, and she is one of those people, and we all know them, who is so kind and good that when the difficult customers come into the restaurants, the jerks, right? They send her over to them because she's so soft and gentle. When you're with somebody, like you're in a really shitty mood, right? And someone who's like soft and gentle, maybe it's even a young person, enters the room, all of a sudden your whole disposition just changes. That's Dodie.
That's
And we
great.
talked about Ethiopia. We talked about her relationship with her mother and her 12 brothers and sisters or whatever.
Wow.
And she said, Avrum, I just love the world. I love people. So that was probably my favorite interview.
Well, what a great way to sum all of this up, because you just referred to her love and the way that she enlightens people just by her demeanor. We've talked a little bit about on the podcast today about what's going on around the world. Despite all of that, why do you still do what you do? Why do you still believe in people? Because we're all a little bit more crabbier now.
Speak for yourself.
I'm like way more crabbier now.
If I were sitting with you guys, I would probe really deeply into who you are, because everything else to me is quite boring. I really want to know your essence. And when I go about such a thing, and I just had breakfast with a wonderful man who's going to be a guest on my show, and he told me about an 18-month relationship that he had with a second wife who ultimately died from breast cancer. So you think to yourself, or I asked him, I go, what was the 18-month relationship like with her ultimately dying? Did you feel like it was a 30-year relationship in a year and a half that you crammed everything into? Or when she passed, did you think to yourself, or did you say, damn, I could have had so much more? And I learned from his answers, and I thought about my own life and how I respond to love and how I respond to people who come into my life for a very short period of time or longer. So I learned from everybody. There's a saying in Hebrew in Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers, Ezu Chacham, who's a wise person, Lomed Mikol Adam, somebody who learns from everybody. If I'm conscious of that, if I'm aware of that, if I keep reminding myself that everybody has a story, everybody is out there fighting, everybody's doing their best, everybody is bringing something to humankind, that is my energy. That's my fuel. That's the thing that keeps me going.
Thank you so much for spending
Thanks,
half an
Avrum.
hour with us.
Thank
You can probe my mind anytime.
There's a lot in there.
Sounds like-
It'll take
sounds like
you
Star
about
Trek.
7 seconds, but anyway.
There's some dark, scary places in there, but there's also beautiful
Mine
light.
too. Mine too.
Thank you, Avrum.
Thanks,
you.
Avrum. Really
Thank you very
appreciate
much.
it. Well, I am inspired by humankind. No, I feel with Avrum, I believe that I like the fact that humanity is humanity. I mean, when you're helping people, it's all people, and I aspire to that. And it was refreshing to have a straightforward conversation with him.
Well, dare I plug his show, the Avrum Rosensweig Show, where he talks to people who are great just like him. But if you were inspired by him, listen to our show first, which is Believe in People. Try to believe in people. Listen to us next week, and then listen to the Avrum Rosensweig Show, which is equally interesting. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.